Again, it's a rich thing.
What is going on, guys? Welcome back. In today's video, we're going to talk about bulk file renaming in Python. What this means is that we're going to use Python to take multiple files and automatically rename them according to our patterns or our renaming guidelines. And in today's video, we're going to do this in two parts. In the first part, I'm going to show you how to do that in a very basic way, just using Python without any graphical user interface, without anything fancy. And in the second part, we're going to build a full GUI application, so a graphical user interface application where we can open up directories. All the files are going to be listed. We can select individual files. Then we have a collection of selected files, and then we can apply our logic onto these files, and they're going to be renamed according, again, to our patterns or guidelines. So this is what we're going to build today. Let us get right into it. All right, so let's get right into it. We're going to cover a couple of use cases here. Of course, not all of the possible use cases that we might want to cover, but this is just a general introduction to the whole thing. Of course, you can come up with your own crazy algorithms. The first thing we want to do is, let's say we have a directory with a couple of files, for example, myfile.txt or mydocument.docx. And then hello.xls, so an Excel file, for example, whatever, a couple of files without any particular pattern. And we want to take all of these files from a directory and rename them with one new name and a counter in the end. So for example, we want to take all these files and just rename them to renamed 1.txt, renamed 2.docx, so we keep the file endings, renamed 3.xls, and so on. This is the first use case. How do we do that? For this, what we need first is we need to import OS, because OS is going to provide us with the rename function. The rename function is essentially the same as the move function. So it's essentially just taking one file and moving it to another place, basically renaming it. And the function is going to be called file renaming, or let's call it rename files. And all we need to provide here is the directory, because we're going to take all the files of a directory. We can later on also specify file types and so on. But for now, we're going to take all the files and we're going to give them a new name that we're just going to call new name. And essentially what we want to do is we want to now get an iterator for all the files in the directory. How do we do that? We say files equals os.list dir list directory, and we pass directory here as a path. And then essentially we create a counter initialized with 0, and then we can iterate over the file. So we can say for file in files, and all we want to do here now is we want to take one path and turn it into another path. So all we want to do here is we want to say os.rename, and here we need to provide now what is it now and what is it going to be after the renaming. The problem here is, of course, that we want to keep the file type, so we need to first extract the file type. So if a file is called whatever.txt, it should be renamed to new name and counter, but we want to keep the txt. We don't want to change the txt to something else. And because of that, we need to extract the file type first. We're going to call this file type, and this is basically just going to be the file split at the dot, and we want to get the last element of this split, because split basically, if we have a string like myfile.isCool.txt with a couple of dots, it's going to split this into a list of 4 words in this case. The problem is we don't want to have the first dot or the second dot. We want to have the last dot, because after the last dot, this is the ending that we want to use. Now this is quite primitive, because if you have something like tar.gz, this is not going to work anymore. But again, this is just an introduction lesson here. So we're going to work with that. And essentially, we're going to then say os rename. And we're going to rename the directory that we're currently in plus a slash plus file. So the current file, we're going to rename this to directory plus slash plus new name plus string of counter plus file type, and of course a dot in between those. So that's a very simple rename function. We can also print what is happening. So we can say print renaming file, maybe with a space here, to, and then new name plus dot plus file type. Of course, plus string counter as well. And of course, important, we always want to increase the counter. Otherwise, it's going to be quite stupid because we're always going to use the same counter. And of course, in Python, we don't have an increment. So plus equals 1 is the way to go. And this is actually the first bulk renaming function we can use. So let's run an experiment. I'm going to go to the desktop. I'm going to create here a new directory. I'm going to call this test here. And inside of it, I'm going to create a couple of files. So we're going to have a text document, testme.txt. Then we're going to create another document. For example, let's go with an Excel worksheet, mydata.xlsx, and then maybe a Word document, test, then another Word document, maybe test2, and then one more, I don't know, rich text, hey.rtf. Now, what I need to specify is this path here. So I'm going to copy it from the Explorer, and I'm going to now call this function on this path. So I'm going to say rename. Of course, we need to make this a string, and we need to double escape. So actually, we need to escape the backslash, because otherwise it's going to treat it as a \t, for example, for tab. And of course, the function is not rename, but rename files. And the new name is going to be, let's call it my new name. There you go. Now, if we did everything correctly, we're going to now see that this is going to rename the files. And in this case, you can see renaming hey RTF to new name 0 RTF. My data xlsx is now my new name 1, and so on. So this actually worked. We can also see that this is actually the case. Of course, you can also change the counter to start at 1 if you don't like the 0 here, because outside of programming, people start counting at 1, obviously, or from 1. So this is the first little function that we can already use for some simple bulk file renaming. Now we can actually go ahead and modify this function a little bit to have a more advanced function, so we can filter by ending, for example, by just adding an additional parameter, ending, and then we're going to just say if file.ends with ending, then we're going to do all of this. Otherwise, we're not going to do it. And this is essentially now a different function. So for example, if I add here docx and I run this, let's rename this to something new like that. Now, if I run this again, you can see that only 2 files were renamed because 2 files are ending with docx and have the file type docx. Now, this is not only for file endings, we can also specify certain patterns in general. So if I know that I have a directory full of docx files, I can also say, okay, give me something that ends with a number, point, or .docx. So I can also specify patterns in the name itself, not only a data type. For example, now in this case, it's not really going to trigger. But for example, if I don't have the number here, but in the beginning, for example, 0 something new, 1 something new, and so on, but I also have different docx files, I can also specify something new .docx, and all the files that end with this string here are going to be replaced by something else here. Now, last but not least, before we move on to the graphical user interface part, I would like to show you how to work with regular expressions. So how to use regular expressions instead of something simple like ends with or starts with or contains. We can specify very complicated expressions that filter for certain patterns in file names, and only if a certain pattern is matched, then we're going to rename the file. Now, for those of you who don't know what regular expressions are, they're quite complicated to write and read sometimes. So don't be confused. This video is not about regex. So if you don't understand it, don't worry. Just continue watching the video or skip that part. But essentially, regex or regular expressions are something that allows us to specify a certain format. And if that format is matched, then we can proceed with the renaming part. So in order to do that in Python, we need to import RE, which is a core Python module, so nothing has to be installed here. And we're going to change this function now by removing the ending and renaming it to pattern. And instead of asking if the file ends with ending, we're going to say if re.match, if the pattern that we have here matches the file, or the file matches the pattern, the file name matches the pattern. If that is the case, we're going to rename it. Now, we can keep that function down here, but we're going to replace the actual pattern. And the pattern in our case, for example, could be, let me just see if I have the directory. So here we have a couple of functions starting with my new name and a couple of functions starting with something new. Now we can filter, for example, for something that begins with the keyword my. And maybe in order to show you that this actually works, we're going to create a new file here and we're going to call it my different file. So also starting with my, but not with my new name. And what we can do now is we can say, okay, give me a file where I have my in the beginning and then point star. Point star basically means any character as often as you want. This is the regular expression for that. So my is what it has to start with. This is just two letters, M and Y. And then point stands for any letter and the star stands for as many times as you want. So 0 or 1,000 times doesn't really matter. If the file starts with MI, basically this is going to match. And we're going to rename this to success to see that this actually worked. We can run this now. And you can see my different file txt was renamed to success 0. And then the different my new name files were also renamed to success. And of course, we can also do that with file types now. So we can say point whatever and then point txt. Now I'm not sure if we have to escape the point. Maybe with a backslash. I'm not a regex pro myself. Let's see if that works. Okay, in this case it worked, but the problem is we renamed it again to success. So let's rename it to different. There you go. Now I'm not sure if this actually works properly, so let's see if that would still do the thing. Okay, so I'm not sure if this is the proper regular expression for that, but for example, we can also now try something else. We can say, let's create another file here that doesn't have a number in it. So other file, there's no number in it. All the other files have a number. So we can say, for example, one pattern that we can specify is whatever, how many times you want, but in the end we want to have a number, so 0 to 9 specified like that, and then we want to have dot whatever essentially. So we want to have a number in between basically, or in general this means that we want to have a number in the name. And if that is the case, we are going to call this number. There you go. So now you can see that all these files are renamed to numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the one file that didn't have any numbers, other file, is still otherfile.txt. Again, this is not about regex, this video. I just wanted to show you how you can do that simply. If you understand regex, there are multiple regexes out there, many regexes out there that are multiple lines long. So it can get very complicated. But still, if you understand regex, you can use that as well for bulk file renaming. Alright, so for the second part of this video, we're going to build a graphical user interface like this one. We're going to be able to open up a directory to, for example, go to desktop and test your select folder. Then we're going to get a list of all the files in that directory. We're going to be able to then filter for certain files. For example, I can type something like number and then point star, a regular expression, filter files, and then it's going to select the files that match this pattern. I can also remove them. I can also type other, for example, here, other point star filter files. I can also go ahead and say, for example, all the txt files. So whatever .txt like that. Then we get only the txt files. And once I have a list of selected files, I can do something down below here. So I can add a prefix, I can remove a prefix, I can add a suffix, remove a suffix, or choose a new name pattern. So in this case, for example, what I can do is I can say add prefix and I can say text underscore. And by pressing apply, you can see that now I have the files text underscore number 1, text underscore number 2, and text underscore other file. I can also remove that prefix. I can select these files here manually, put them in the right into the right list, and I can then remove the prefix text. Now you can see it's gone again. I can also go ahead and add a suffix. So let's pick these 3 files here, add a suffix, and the suffix is going to be underscore test, for example, apply. There you go. And now I can also choose these 4, for example, choose a new name pattern and call them new pattern. And then apply this, and you can see we have new pattern 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is what we're going to build here. So in order to build this graphical user interface, we're going to use PyQt5, and in particular for the design, we're going to use the Qt Designer. So what we need to do is we need to install the Qt Designer, and you also need to install from the command line pip install PyQt5 if you haven't done so yet. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with PyQt5 at all, you've never worked with it and you're a bit confused, I have a tutorial on that. I have a full crash course on PyQt5, so I'm not going to explain all the basics here. Of course, if something is a little bit more complicated and does not belong to the very basic content, I'm going to mention briefly how it works. But for the basic stuff like a menu, like a push button, like a line edit, I'm not going to talk about all the details there. So what we want to do is we want to create a new main window. We want to start with an additional menu here, file, and we want to add this open directory option here. You can also skip that part if you want to. You can design your own graphical user interface. It's actually, yeah, just the way I did it. You can also change this. So we're going to choose a line edit. There you go. For the filtering, so for the regex, you could say. Then we're going to add a push button for the actual filter. So we're going to call this filter. Like that. We can make this a bit smaller. And then essentially what I chose to do is I use 2 list views. So one list view here and another one here. We can actually make this a bit larger. There you go. And then I also had the 2 buttons for the selection. Essentially with 3 greater signs with less than signs or symbols. And then I had a couple of radio buttons. Do we have a radio button here? There you go. Radio button 1, radio button 2. Or actually, let's first of all set the font sizes. So we're going to actually select all of these UI elements, and we're going to change the font size here to something else. We're going to increase it a little bit. I don't think that we need to have it bold though, right? No, we don't need that. Okay, so we have increased the font size. For this, we're going to also increase the font size a little bit. And we're going to copy the button so that we have 5 buttons. And of course, we can definitely make this more beautiful, but we're not going to win a design contest here. So add prefix, remove prefix. Now this is actually a bit too large. Add suffix, remove suffix, new name, like that. And then finally, we have the apply button. Actually, I'm going to copy it from this button here. Apply, there you go. Now, does this look like that? Yeah, okay. A little bit different, but doesn't really matter. So this is our thing. Now, one thing that you can do just for the sake of readability is you can rename the stuff, because what you're going to have to do in Python is you're going to have to address the individual buttons. So this filter button here is actually not called filter button, it's called push button, like that. And this function or this button here is called push button _2, and this is called push button _4, and so on. So we will change that real quick to filter button to select button to remove button to apply button. Then this is going to be not line edit, but filter edit. This is going to be the select, or actually no, we can actually call this list view. And this is going to be the select view. And this is actually fine, I guess. Let's call this action open. And here we're going to have the individual radio buttons. So add prefix radio, remove prefix radio, add suffix radio. Guess what? Remove suffix radio and new name radio. There you go. So then we can actually, or before we save that, actually we want to select these two list views here, and we want to change their, selection mode to extended selection so that we can select multiple items. We're going to save that now to our desktop, and we're going to call this bulk GUI.ui. And then we're going to take that file and we're going to drag it into PyCharm. Going to stop this thing here, and we're going to drag this into our working directory. And now we can start with the coding. All right, so we start with a new Python file from scratch, but we're still going to import OS. We're going to also import RE, and now we're going to also import from pyqt5.qtGUI. We're going to import the Q standard item model and the Q standard item. Now, those two things are important because in the list view, we cannot just treat the list view itself like a list. The list view is a UI element, and it has to have an item model in the background that contains all the elements. And the item model is the item model, and the individual items are the Q standard items. So this is what we need that for. We also need from pyqt5.qt_widgets. We're going to import everything. Don't use wildcard imports if you're working on a real project. For tutorials, it's fine. For demonstrational purposes, just for showing you how things work, it's fine. But in a real project, never use wildcard imports. And then from pyqt5 or actually only from pyqt5, we're going to import UIC. All right, and we can now go ahead and create a class for the graphical user interface. We're going to say class myGUI, and we're going to extend here from the Q main window. And in the init function, we're going to call this super constructor. So we're going to say super myGUI self __ init, and then UIC load UI, and we load the UI at the path bulk GUI.ui, and we pass self here. So it's loaded into the self object, and then we say self.show, and the rest is going to be done afterwards. So this is the basic definition for loading the UI. And then we're going to now say app equals Q application. We're going to leave the arguments empty, so an empty list. And then we're going to say window equals my GUI, and then app.execute _, so exec _. If I now run this, this is the UI that we just created in Qt Designer. Now it doesn't have any functionality yet, so I can press whatever I want here. I can press apply, I can filter, doesn't really matter. I can try to open something, doesn't work. It's just the UI design itself. For some reason, all my windows minimized here. But essentially, we can now go ahead and work with this UI. The important thing is, of course, that we need to remember these names. So whenever I want to access something, because I don't redefine these things in the code, the UI file already has these things defined. So I just have to access them using the self object. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to start by defining some default values. So for example, the directory by default is going to be a dot for the current directory. And we're going to also initialize the file model, or the item model actually, so the file list model. Let's call this a list model. This is going to be a Q standard item model like that. Then we're going to also have a select model. Now the question is now, should we keep the Python convention of using underscores, or should we go with the PyQt5 convention? I'm going to go with the PyQt5 convention, and this is going to also be a standard item model. And then we say self dot select, or what was it called? I forget that. This was the select view. So the self.select view is going to be we're going to set the model of it to the self.select model. Like that. And also, as I already have done this in the hashtag generator, for those of you who watched it, we also want to keep track of the selections using a list. So selected is going to be an empty list. We don't want to have this only as an item model. We also want to have a list. And now basically everything is going to be in functions, and the buttons are going to trigger the individual functions. Now, what functions are we going to have? We're going to have the load directory function. We're going to pass for all of those now. We're going to have the rename files function, which is going to actually trigger the final renaming. We're going to have the choose selection function. We're going to pass this one as well. And we're going to have a remove selection function. And we're going to have a filter list function. Now, all these functions don't have parameters because the parameters are going to be part of the UI. So we're going to get the values from the individual things. And we can actually start by defining, by connecting the buttons and the options to the actual function. So we're going to say self dot, again, what did I call this thing here? I called it action open. Actually, it was called action open, wasn't it? Self action open triggered is going to be connected to self dot load directory. And of course, we don't call the function, we pass the function as an entity. Then self filter button dot clicked dot connect self dot rename files. Let me just double check again if that's actually the name. Filter button, there you go. Then self dot select. Okay, one more time. Let me just see here. We have, this is the select button, this is the remove button, and this is the apply button. Okay. So the select button clicked will result in calling the select or the choose selection function. Then we can actually copy that and replace this by remove button. And this is going to be the remove selection function. And then self.apply button. Oh, actually, I'm stupid. This is going to be a link to the filter list function here. And this one is going to do the renaming. Like that. There you go. So that is how we're going to do that. We can also see if that works by removing, for example, the pass and printing some test messages here. So let's see if that works. If I now press this here, we see open in the command line. If I press this here, we see test. Okay, so the buttons are linked to the functions, at least some of them. And we can now replace this with pass again. But this is actually all we need to do in terms of linking the buttons to the actual functions. Now, everything else is going to happen inside of the functions. And the first function is actually quite simple. It's just going to load a directory. It's going to take all the files from that directory. We're going to iterate over them, create Q standard items out of these file names, and then we're going to add them to the list. So we're going to say self.directory is going to be os dot, no, it's not going to be os dot anything, it's going to be Q file dialog. Q file, not file name. Okay, the auto completion is a little bit annoying. Q file dialog dot get existing directory. So the directory already has to exist, and this is going to be select directory as a title, and the result of that is going to be the directory, and then we're going to say for file in os.list_dir. So basically what we did before, self.directory for all the files here. We're going to say, okay, if os.path.isFile, and then file, or actually os path join, and we need to join here the self.directory and the file. There you go. Only then are we going to add this to the file model. So self dot, I call it a different name here. I call it the list model. So self dot list model dot append row, and we're going to append a Q standard item of file. Now, why are we doing all of that? We're going through all the files in the directory, or through all the things in the directory, and some of them are going to maybe be other directories. Now, of course, you can take the time and do this recursively. You can also go deeper into other directories and list their files if you want to. But in this case, we're only interested in the files. So we don't want to know other directories in that directory. We only want to get the files. And because of that, we check if at this particular file path, we find a file instead of a directory, and then we add it to the list model. And in the end, what we're going to do is we're going to say self dot, what was the list view? I think it was just list view, right? Set model, and we're going to set the self file model. Now I'm not sure if we cannot already do this up there, but for now, and why do I always call this file model? It's called file model in my prepared code, so I always type file model. It's actually called list model, obviously. And this here is a duplicate code fragment only because I have this code already prepared. So again, what we do is we open up a file dialog, we select the directory, we go through all the files that are actually files and not directories, we append them to the list model, and then we set the list model to the list view. I think this should actually already work, so let's give it a try. Let's open a directory, let's go to desktop, test directory, select folder. No, it crashes. Why does it crash though? I'm not sure, we're going to see. Let's give it a try. Accept exception as E, and we're going to print E. With PyQt5, you need to do it like that, otherwise you're not going to get the error message. So let's open the directory again. Let's go to the test here. Let's select the folder. My GUI object has no attribute list model. Okay, because we need to have a capital M here, I think, right? At least I think so. So let's run this again. Open directory, test here, select folder. There you go. Now we have it. So this works now. Let's move on to the next function, which is choose selection and remove selection. Those are actually quite simple. We're going to do the renaming in the end. So the choose selection function is going to just say if the length of the selected file, so of the list view, dot selected indexes. So if we have selected indexes, and so basically if that is not 0, if the amount of selected indexes is not 0, then we're going to choose them, then we're going to move them to the selected view. So we're going to say for index in self.listView.selected indexes. We're going to say if the index data is not already in self-selected, because we don't want to add files multiple times. if it's not already part of selected, we're going to say self.selected.append index data like that, and then self.select model.append row Q standard item index data. And the thing doesn't detach, so let me just kill it here. This should actually work, so let us also implement the remove selection function. Here basically we're saying try. I'm going to try to, or actually, do I need this, or did I only do that because I wanted to troubleshoot? We're going to try it with a try except, but essentially we're going to say if the length again of the self dot, this time the other one, so of the select view, or what did I call it? Select view, yes. If the length of the select view dot selected indexes is not equal to 0, we're going to reverse the order. I explained this in a video in the past already, because if we don't reverse the order, we're going to remove elements, and then we're going to try to remove elements at the same position again or at different positions. So I'm going to show you in a second why we're going to do that, but we're going to say for index in reversed sorted self.filtered, actually not filtered, select view dot selected indexes like that. For each index in there, we're going to say self.selected dot remove the element from index data, and then then self dot select model dot remove row index row. What's the problem here now? I don't know what the problem here is. Oh, of course we need an exception as E in case something goes wrong. We're going to print that. But besides that, actually this is the function. So again, let me show you why we do that. I hope it already works and I can show to you why we need to do that. The problem is that if I open some files and if I move them to the right here, if I select now a couple of files here, they're going to be removed one by one, and because of that, they're going to change positions. So essentially, if I remove these files now, it's going to work because I reversed the order. But I'm going to show you what happens if I don't do that. So let's just delete reversed and sorted. It's not always going to produce problems, but oftentimes it's going to produce problems. And we don't need these problems, so let's open that up. If I now add a couple of them and I now go ahead and remove a couple of them, there you go, not in list. Because the order and the whole program is going to crash. Or in this case, it's not gonna crash because I catch the exception here and I print it. But the problem is that if I don't reverse the order, it's not going to go from back to the front. So it's going to shift positions, and then it's going to try to remove something that isn't there. Because of that, we want to reverse and sort the order. That way it works. Besides that, we're now going to go to the filter list, and then last but not least, we're going to implement the renaming itself. So for the filter, we're going to say self.select model.clear, essentially saying that everything that is selected is going to be cleared, so we don't have it anymore, so that we can actually only have the matches of the regular expressions in there. And then we're going to say for index in range, and then self.list model.row count. For all the elements that we have there, we're going to say item equals self.list model.item index. So we're getting the individual items from the individual indices here. So we're getting all all the individual indices, and we're getting the items of these indices. And then we say, okay, if the item that I have there, if the file name that I have there matches the regular expression, so if re match, and the pattern is of course part of the, what did I call it, filter edit, in this case, self.filter edit dot text. There we have the pattern, and the item itself has a text as well, like that. And if the pattern matches, then we're going to say self.select model.append row Q standard item from item text. And of course, self.selected.append item.text. By the way, I don't have that in the prepared code, but I think we should also, not sure if I'm forgetting something right now, but I'm pretty sure we also should set selected to an empty list. Otherwise, we're going to have some problems. All right, so that's filtering, removing, choosing, and loading. Now we're going to rename the files, and for that we need to focus on the radio buttons, because the radio buttons determine how we rename the files. How do we rename them? We have the add prefix, we have the remove prefix, we have the suffix, adding and removing, and then we have the new name. So essentially we're going to start by defining a counter as 1, and we're going to say if self dot, now we need to see, how did I call them again? I called them add prefix radio, remove prefix radio, and so on, and then new name radio. So okay, if add prefix radio dot is checked, and only one button can be checked at a time, so we don't need to check if all the others are not checked. If it is checked, we're going to say OS rename, and then OS path join the self directory and the file name. Now the file name, oh, sorry, I forgot to open up the loop. We need to say, of course, for file name in self.selected, because obviously the renaming is only going to be applied onto the selection, so we don't need to look into the views. Actually, we only need to look into the list that we have, the selected list. And for each file name, we're going to see, okay, we're going to rename it according to the selected option. So in this case, we're going to rename the file at this position to OS path. This is a bit tedious because the lines are getting too long here. OS path join, and then self dot directory, and then self dot rename. We're adding a prefix, right? So self dot, what did I call this thing there? Oh, I forgot a major element. I forgot a major element in my graphical user interface. This is not good. We need to add that right now. We need to add the line edit that is responsible for choosing the actual name, the actual suffix, prefix, or new name that we add to the file name. So what font size did we choose here? We chose 14. Here we're going to choose 14 as well. Let's call this name edit, save this onto the desktop again, and now we need to replace that here, overwrite, there you go. So what we want to add here is we want to add to the directory, so to the path to the directory, we want to add first of all the prefix, so the name edit dot text plus the file name that we already have right now. And I think that is actually it for that option. Now let me just check if I'm not blocking anything here. No, I'm not. And then we have the other cases as well. So we have the case that self.remove prefix radio is checked. And in that case, we need to check, first of all, if the file name actually starts with the prefix, because otherwise it doesn't make sense to remove it. So we're going to say if file name dot starts with starts with self.nameEditText. If that is the case, then what we're going to do is we're going to rename the current file name again, like that. We're going to rename this here to, and we're going to remove by using index slicing. We're going to remove, I'm going to say again, OS path join. And here we're going to say file name, but from the position length of self.nameEdit.text. So however long that prefix is, we're going to go to that position and we're going to take the string from there. So this should actually be it. Then we have elif self.addSuffix radio is checked. If that is the case, we're going to say OS rename. And essentially we can copy the prefix stuff here, but we need to, or actually we cannot copy it because we need the file type. We need to consider the file type. So we need to say actually file type equals file name dot split on a point, and want to get the last result again. So this is the file type, and then we're going to say, okay, we rename the current file to, and we're going to add a suffix. So we take the current file plus whatever is part of the name edit. So name edit text, like that, plus, and then a dot, and then the actual, oh, now I messed up a couple of things, sorry. What we need to do is, let's remove all of this first. So we need to add self dot, or actually the file name first. The file name first, then the suffix. So self dot nameEdit dot text, then dot, then file type. That's it. All right. So we have that. Now we also have the option of removing a suffix. Remove suffix radio is checked. And here essentially we need to do the same thing. We need to consider the file type. So the file type, actually let's copy this here. The file type is what the file type is. And then we're going to say, in this case, if the file name ends with self name edit text, and also the file type or dot file type, then we're going to do that. What are we going to do? We're going to say OS rename OS path current to OS path join self.directory, and we want to remove the suffix, so we need to work with slicing again. What we're going to do essentially is we're going to take the file name up until the point where the thing begins, so minus the length of self dot name edit text plus a dot and plus the file type. So we're going to take the first part of that and then plus a dot and a file type. There you go. And then last option is elif what if we want a new name. This is essentially what we did all the time. So self dot new name radio is checked. If that is the case, what we're going to do is we're going to take the file type again, and then we're going to essentially say rename, again, OS path join file name to OS path join directory file name. actually not file name, but what we want to have is we want to have the new name. So the self.nameEdit.text plus a point or a dot, and then the file type. And of course, don't forget the counter. So plus str counter. And of course, the counter needs to be increased by 1. There you go. And we can also say else. Otherwise, if we don't select anything, we're going to say select a radio button. And once all of this is done, so basically when we have renamed the files, what we're going to do is we're going to say self.selected equals an empty list. Self.select model is going to be cleared. Self.list model is going to be cleared. And for file in OS lister of the current directory, we're going to say again if the file is actually a file. So we're going to basically update the list if the file in that iteration is a file. Then self.fileModel.list model. We're going to append to it the row, the Q standard item model, or the Q standard item of the file. And in the end, self.listView is going to get the model of self.list model. There you go. So this part was a bit tedious and it's prone to errors. So let's see if it actually works. Did I start a debugger now? Come on. Let's run this and see if it works on our test directory. So open the directory, go to the desktop, go to the test directory, select it, choose a couple of those, then add a prefix, test underscore, apply. This works. So now let's filter here for something containing the letter or NU in the text. So we can say whatever, NU, whatever, filter. And here we get these 3 here. So we can remove, or actually not remove. Let's add a suffix new, underscore new, apply. This works. Now actually it doesn't work. So it added the suffix, but it also added the file type. So we need to fix that real quick. So the add suffix has to consider that we don't take the file name and then add the file name, but we take the file name up until the actual up until the file type itself. So up until the length of the file type. Now it was plus or minus 1. Let me check. It was plus 1. But it was in parentheses because otherwise it's going to go the other way. All right. So this should work now. Open it again. Test directory, select folder. Filter again for new. And then there you go. And now let's first of all give them a new name. Test me. Apply. There you go. Now we can take all of these, put them on the left or on the right here, and we can add a suffix here with an underscore before that. And now we have a problem. Why do we have a problem? Let's see what the problem is. We're going to have a try. And an except. And we're going to print the exception and see why it doesn't work. Okay, so it did work for some of them. Let's give them a new name. Hello. There you go. And now choose them. Underscore new. And then add suffix apply. Cannot create a file that already exists. It tried to create... Oh, okay. When a file already exists, of course, we need to... In this case, what did it do? It actually took hello3.txt and it tried to rename it to hellnew.txt. So this is a problem with the add suffix. So the add suffix has a problem. We just double check here. We have up until, negative that. We want to go from right to left. I messed up the order. So let's run this again. Now it should work. Pretty sure that it will work now. So let's take those again. Let's give them a new name. Apply. Let's take them to the right. Add a suffix. Now it works. And then apply. There you go. Now it works, actually. And we can also try to remove it. So let's put it to the right. Let's remove the suffix. Here I have a typo, directory. So we need to go with directory. Directory. Where do I have this? Directory. And one more time reboot, but after that it should work. But this is the real programming, guys. Whenever you write code, you're going to find some stupid mistakes and then you're going to have to fix them. So again, let's remove the suffix underscore. Now it works. There you go. Okay, so this is how you build a bulk file renaming tool in Python. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting the like button and leaving a comment in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to not miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you much for watching. See you in the next video and bye.